So I'm just working on a Jekalyn Carr song, and my goal overall is try to make the drums sound as natural as possible. So I'm going to play a little 32-second clip. Here we go. And after this plays, I'm going to give you an idea of how I developed the snare sound on the song. Especially notice that during this verse it sounds pretty raggedy. It's kind of cool sounding snare. Okay, so that was the whole track with the snare EQ'd and with samples with it. But when I start out with the track, I'll listen to the original snare like this, and I'll listen to it dry with no verb or anything on it and decide what the heck is going on with this puppy. And I felt this snare was pretty dull, but it was recorded really well. So I added some probably about 6 dB at 8K. But I don't want to turn this track up too loud because there'll be a lot of hi-hat leakage into it. So I duplicate the track, and with the same SSL EQ, I gate it to cut out as much hi-hat leakage as possible. Now I know you can hear that hi-hat bleeding through there, but it's way less than it would be. And if you notice, this track is a lot louder than the original track. And I'm mainly keeping that original track in there though, so I can get all the action that the drummer's doing in between the backbeats. And then on this duplicate track, I'll add a little bit of verb to it, a short room. This is what it sounds like if it's extreme. We don't want that. So we're just adding a little bit to stretch the snare out a little bit. And we're getting less high frequency from the hi-hat in this one because of the gate. There's something I want you to know about when you're trying to make a snare natural. You've got to go in and look for all the accented notes that the drummer's doing, all his little paradiddles and things. And I noticed in this song, in the verse, he was playing, here I'll play just the original snare with no EQ on it. In between, he's doing some extra accent beats. And so what I did is I duplicated the track again and took out all the backbeats and only kept in his little paradiddles that he's doing in between. And when you mix that in with this, you can hear every little sweet little motion that he's doing with the snare. Because all that stuff gets lost in the track with all the music that's going on. So I want to be able to control all the subtlety that the drummer's doing. So I want to try to make the backbeat sound bigger but still sound natural. So then the first thing that I did was added a sample snare. And I'm going to play the bigger section, and you'll see what the sample snare does to it. And I've also added some short room to that sample snare. But I still want some more room, so then, and I want a little more oomph from that snare, a little more attack. So I've added in another trigger, and this trigger is from Drum Warehouse 2 called the Collector. I don't want a ton of it because I still want the snare to sound natural. This is what it sounds like if I turn it up loud. It adds almost a low end to it, but I don't want a lot of that in this particular song. So I'm going to keep it down around here, about -9 compared to the other snares. But at this point, I felt like when I'm listening to the whole track, I didn't feel like there was enough ambience. So on this track, I added in the old Z snare from Slate because it has a nice ambience to it. And I didn't feel like it had enough, so I added another room to it, a little bit longer room. It's a wood room. You can probably find any wood room and use it. But I still felt like the snare wasn't cutting through this whole track very well. So I added a sample called Jimmy's Snare, which I think is in the original Drum Warehouse, right, John Mike? And you'll see inside the track, snare's cutting through, but it still kind of sounds natural. And then I add in this last sample, which is going to give it a little thickening. And I call it Jackie Snare. And that'll be in the next set of warehouses, drum warehouses that we do. And this snare will add a little body to the snare. Watch. But still, you can still hear that original snare from the original recording in there. And all these other snares are just making it a little bit bigger inside the track. And of course there is a bottom snare. I kind of listened to the bottom snare early on. I'm not showing you that part of it right now, but anyways, inside the track it sounds like this. But in a song like this, there's other subtle things that you need to recognize. Like at the very beginning of the song, he's doing some really cool movement on his snare. Listen to the very beginning. So in order to capture what the drummer's really doing, I have to turn off a lot of these samples and or turn them down. And so at the very beginning of the song, you'll notice I turned down the samples. I turned off 2 of the samples, turned down these 3 samples so that you mainly are just hearing the original snare and all of his little accents without any processing, basically. And once it hits that backbeat, I've added in the samples. And then, when it comes to this verse coming up, you'll notice that I back down all the samples right here. They're still in there, but they're a lot lower. So I get all the accents that the drummer's actually doing. And I'll go through the whole song and look for moments like that, like this. Now it's big again. But it still sounds natural. And again, we came to the verse, and I've pulled back the samples and turned up the original snare. So the whole thing's an illusion. Okay, so that's just a look at the snare. But overall, before I've ever even got to EQing the snare, I listened to the whole drum kit as a whole and looked to see how everything was recorded, see how the overheads were recorded and how the toms were recorded. And in this case, usually when I first start, I'll listen to just the overheads. And so here's the overheads with no EQ or very little. Let's see, I'll make sure it's not going through anything. Yeah, so this is what the overheads sound like, flat. And I just know from a lot of experience that there's a lot of unnecessary low end that's probably in this track and these overheads. So I've filtered out the lows. And there's a tendency for drums to sound boxy. So I've taken out, in this case, around 500 hertz. You kind of hear all that. And then I noticed that when I was listening to this, that the left side wasn't, like there was an unevenness in the snare. I mean, in the snare, in the overheads, period. And so I'm actually compensating by raising up the left side of these cymbals so that the snare is more centered and that the cymbals are more even. And then we also, they recorded a ride cymbal, and so when it gets into a ride section, I might ride the ride cymbal, but in this case I didn't have to do it throughout the track, as you can see. So after I listen to the overheads, I'll go back and start listening to the kick and the snares and see where they sit. And I noticed that this kick was pretty boxy. So I went in and carved out the low mids at around 300, I guess I picked 362. I just listened and found it, okay, basically. Don't go by that. You have to listen to your kick individually. But it's usually going to be, the boxiness is going to be in this range. So I'll drag that out. I'll try to get a little attack from it. And then I listen to their sub kick, and it's really a sub kick. I can't turn it up. And I basically applied the same EQ to it. But I knew I was going to probably add a sample because I felt like the kick was pretty weak. So then I added what we call a kick, named after Aaron Lewis, by the way. And it's in the warehouse. And on this particular day, I didn't add any EQ to that kick. And then I added to this whole thing, I'm using a kick from actually Slate. I know I should have used one of my own, but I didn't. I used Slate kick, which is, I think it's called a CLA kick. That's what it is. It's a Chris Lord algae kick. And I found that it works well with my Aaron kick, or A kick, when it's out of phase with it. You'll notice when I go in and out, the low end becomes more prevalent when I put it out of phase. This is something I noticed. It may not translate that with every sample. So you have to be careful. You always have to listen, and listen fairly loud to find out whether the low end is going away or you're actually producing more low end when you add the sample. Now, something y'all need to know is that before I ever do any of this stuff, if I have the original sample, the A kick, which you see is printed here, every one of these is phase coherent to the original kick. If you look at this A kick against the original kick drum, with this top one here is the inside kick mic, and you'll notice it's perfectly in phase with A kick. And then what I do is I duplicate once, and literally I have to go through the whole thing and make sure it's phase accurate, because you don't want your low end to change at any point on a kick drum. So you make sure it's phase accurate. Then I trigger a Slate kick with it. And slate trigger is so accurate that it'll stay constant. It'll never shift. So the low end will always stay the same. If you notice. So that's what it sounds like inside the track. And then you saw what I went through for the snare. But now, in this particular song, I really did not like the way the tom sounded. So I ended up using a drum warehouse tom for every tom. So what we did before I even got to this point, once I heard them, I didn't like the way they sounded, but I went in and cleaned them all out so that you can see each tom hit, because originally the toms probably look like this. There's the toms without being cleaned out. That's all snare leakage in there. So go in and clean it out. But then I still didn't like the way they sounded. So then I triggered them with, this is actually from Drum Warehouse 1, and that's called Tom 1, 2, and 3 is what I used. And then I think I added a different floor tom to it. Let me see what I ended up doing. I can't even remember. Yeah, tom 4. So anyways, I found 4 toms in the Drum Warehouse that work well together. And they sound really good in this track. And then I'm also processing them through Waves CLA, Chris Lord Algae tom, his little tom setup, and just added some top end to him. Now let me see what the original sounded like. The reason why did I get rid of these? Let's see. Mainly because they were so ringy, it just didn't feel right inside this track. So I picked that instead. That's kind of has a ring to it too, but not nearly as much as the original did. Now, I just want you to know, I don't typically re-trigger toms. I always try to save them first. Believe me, I'm sure I tried to save this. I worked on this a couple months ago is when I first started. I originally tried to save these toms, but I just felt like they didn't work inside this track. So that's why I triggered them. But normally I will spend a lot of time trying to use the original toms. But in this case, they just didn't feel right to me. So that's why I ended up doing what I did. So not every situation is the same. Okay. Okay, so people ask me, what am I doing on the drum bus? First, I'm doing some parallel compression so I'm sending each drum to my drum press, which is right here, which is a TG, this is the Abbey Road TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess that's what they call it. And basically it's compressing quite a bit, and then I'm returning this to the actual drum bus. So in other words, we're compressing all the drums through this. By the way, this one got turned off. And then this is returning to the actual drum bus. And on the drum bus, so all the drums are running through here. Let's turn it off. Now if I turn off the parallel compression, you'll notice that it gets lower in volume. But I found over time that I needed more parallel compression. So on my drum bus, I'm also using a Slate, what they call the FG 116, which is, I guess, similar to some kind of 1176. And in this case, I'm actually not EQing any high end or anything on this particular song, because I felt like the top end and everything was cutting through with the EQ that I was using, so I didn't add anything to the drum bus as far as EQ. Sometimes if I feel like the cymbals aren't cutting through, I'll add a little bit of top end, not that much, with a Slate FGN. But this guy here is super compressing, but I'm only mixing in about, I guess that's about 25 or 30% of it into the actual mix. If I turned it all the way up, it would sound like this. Oh, I figured it stopped. So there's a little bit less compression when I back it off. But it gives a nice little punch to these drums. So as far as verbs, people ask me about what verbs I use. I usually set up some short ones, some short verbs, which the one I use a lot for really short stuff is Clark Technic. It's called the Alive sound, and it just adds, I demonstrated that earlier, what it's a really short sound, and a little goes a long way of spreading out the drums. So I just use a little bit of it. If I need a little longer verb, I'll use the space, and I'll use a large wood room that adds a nice little ambience to the drums when I need it. And I just keep several different drum verbs sitting around, and if they work on something, they work, and if they don't work. And so there's another short one that I use from an echo plate. Once in a while, I'll use this to stretch out a room a little bit, but it's a short room. And if I ever need a long verb, I'll use the Clark plate. I mostly use it on tambourines and things for length, but sometimes you can add a Clark plate into a snare and it'll expand it, for a ballad or something. And then if there's a medium short room, there's a room called Red Room, which is in the Waves IR that I found. It's from Quad Studios. It's their room sound. It's from Quad Studios, and it adds a nice ambience to drums and all kinds of percussion. So sometimes, just so you know, sometimes when there's dynamics, super dynamic, there's not a lot of dynamics kick drum wise, but let's say there was a section where the kick was doing a thing like, I would go in and just turn down the samples on the kick. I would actually follow the dynamics of what the kick is actually doing. And I would do the same thing with a snare. If there was a snare roll that started out, I would go in and lower the samples and build up to the actual peak of the original snare so that it follows the same dynamics as the drummer played. In this particular song, I don't think there's actually any moves like that, other than what I talked about earlier in the verses, where I turned down the samples so that you could hear the natural snare nuances that the drummer was doing. So, and so in this case, you don't see a lot of changes in the snare volume except in these verses and certain sections where he's doing all that nuance. And then in the very beginning, as I said, I turned off the samples, and you basically are only hearing the original snare drum. Because you got to remember, a lot of that sample stuff gets covered up by all the music. The music is so dense, you're trying to make it sound natural, but at the same time, it's still got to cut through and feel like it has weight. The snare should still have weight. And then there's this particular song, the toms seem to work at the same level throughout most of the song. But if there's a certain spot where I want to raise the toms up for some movement, I'll go in and whatever it takes to make that feel dramatic. Like that's this particular spot where this tom pickup is, it doesn't really need to come up. It kind of all works together with the music that's going on around it. But if I really wanted to do something crazy and make it really loud, I could just go in and grab it. Oh, it sounds way better. We should just do that. And maybe we will. Maybe within the final product, that tom pickup might be louder. You never know. But so those are the things that I, am generally looking for when I'm mixing drums. In this particular mix, the guitars are really important, as you can tell. And honestly, if the guitars are recorded well, I don't have to do a lot to them. If you notice, there's nothing on these guitars. So you don't have to put something on every instrument just because you have it. You know what I'm saying? So these guitars were recorded really well, and all I had to do was, once I got the track pumping on the drums and the bass, I just found a place where these guitars fit. And the guitar player laid them out really well. He's got stereo guitars going throughout the song. He has little extra lead parts. And the only thing I did with this guitar was I kind of panned it a little bit to the left and then added a delay to the right, so that it's very short delay to just make it sound a little bit wider. Here, I'll show you. And so what I'm using to do that is mod delay, which comes with Pro Tools. And basically I just set up a thing where it just delays about 16 milliseconds, and I can vary the amount of send to that. So like if I wanted to be extreme, let's play it here. You'll notice it's sticking out on the right side now. We don't want it to stick out on the right side. We want it to sound like it's starting here, and there's a short room delay to the right-hand side, to the right speaker. And it just makes the guitar sound a little bit bigger. And the only reason why I have this gate on here is because the guitar in between some of the notes had a lot of noise on it. And I want it to cut off right as soon as the track cuts off. I want it to cut off. And I hardly ever do that, by the way. Most of the time I would just go in and find if there's a noise and just cut it out. But as I said, these guitars are recorded really well. All about the bass. This bass sounds great all by itself. All I had to do to this bass was just throw a compressor on it. And I usually default to the Wave CLA 2A. And I'm only compressing it like 2 to 3 dB at the max. I've always felt this particular, the CLA 2A of Chris Lord Alge's adds a little woof on the bottom end. Maybe because the tubes were really old when they sampled it or something, I don't know. But however they derived this thing, it sounds great on bass. But in this particular case, this bass sounds great. And all I had to do was find the right level to mix with the drums. But there's times where I go through and ride the bass. I mean, there's certain licks that I might want to bring up, and I'll ride the bass. This track just kind of seems to flow overall. So on the 2 mix is doing a lot. Here, we'll turn it off. You'll notice the snare sticking out now. And it's crushing, it's overloading. So the first thing that is normally on my tube bus, it's not normally a trimmer, but this track got really hot, so I put a trimmer on it. But wait, the first thing that's normally on the tube bus is the SSL compressor, which I try to keep below compressing more than 4 dB. And then I use the Slate tape emulation, and I usually do it at 15 IPS because I feel like it adds a nice little low end bump to the track. And then if I need to add top end, I'll add it with the Slate FGN. And you'll notice I'm adding a little bit to the overall. And then the Pug Tech, and I try to keep this compression really light. It's only like 1 dB or so. It has a very fast release. And then I'm using the Slate Virtual Mix Bus, which you'll notice is on every channel right here. And I happen to use the SSL one. They call it the British one, British console. And this is the Abbey Road mastering bus, which it's compressing, and I'm only using about 30% mix into 25-30% mix. This obviously widens things out. This is a great little widener. And then I'm using the stay level. Keep everything nice and smooth. And then the last thing in the chain is the PSP Vintage Warmer 2, which this is getting it up to level basically. And it's limiting the overall mix. And if I find that this is limiting too much, then in fact, in this particular case, I felt like it was limiting too much, so I added a trimmer earlier on to lower the level before it hit the Vintage Warmer 2. Last thing, these horns were recorded really well. I just felt like they needed a little more body to them, so I added a Pug Tech Pultec and just added 100 hertz to the overall sound and kind of tell. Oh, watch. Really, I'm not EQing anything, so it was recorded really well. And this just kind of brings out the Barry and the trombones by adding this little low end to it, but it still sounds bright. And then a little bit of compression with a Waves Pug Tech. What is it? Compressing 2 dB. That's it. So this is without all that. Here, let me play this section. Oh, wait, actually, let me play this section, because I actually boosted this section, but without it. Without it. With it. Okay, so a little note about the BGVs. What you're seeing here is the BGVs on let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stereo tracks. But before they were on 6 stereo tracks, there actually were 32 tracks, I believe, approximately 32 tracks. And so before it even gets to me, I had my assistant, which I think in this case would have been Adam David Smith. He bounced down those tracks into sets of stereo tracks, 2 sets of sopranos, 2 sets of altos, 2 sets of tenors, so that it's more easily controlled. And also during that bouncing, he didn't just grab all the tracks and bounce them. He went through and cleaned everything out. And then if any particular singers were popping out, he went in with clip gain and brought them down so that everything stayed even the whole time. Then I get it, and by that point, at least all the noise in between all the tracks is cleaned out, and the overall each individual stereo track is even with each other. And so what I'll do at this point is decide, well, are they dull? Do they need a little bit of boost or whatever? And I'll go through and I'll start out by taking out any rumbles that are possibly in there with a high pass filter. And then I'll do a slight compression with my PSP old timer. I'll just play a little section here. It's no more than 3 dB. And then I'll add some more compression. This is really set a really fast attack and fast release. Then this will be the biggest change right here. This is a CLA Chris Lord Algae setup for vocals. And I'm using it to widen it out a little bit. Now, back before Chris Lord Algae had one of these, this basically, he's either a harmonizer or we would either use a harmonizer or a Yamaha SPX 90 to widen out the vocals with a little bit of pitch shift. And that's what this button basically does right here. And I'm not using any reverb of his. I'm just using a little bit of compression of his, and a little bit of top end. And then, in this case, let me see if there's a spot where they're... I'll add a multiband compressor just to grab some of the harshness out of the vocals from about 2K to upwards of 9K. It'll actually grab some of the S's too. Then I still add a de-esser. And let's see if we can get a SE section. You see that de-esser is working right there. And then I'll add a little bit of more top end to it, just to get some airiness in. I'm using the PSP Precursor 2. And then this is my new. I mean, I love this thing. I wish it's amazing. This is the retro stay level, which compresses a lot, but you can't really hear it. It makes it louder, but you don't really hear the compression that well. It really, truly stays level. And then I'll just add one more fast attack compressor at the end of this. And in this case, I'm using a little bit more compression, but this is a parallel compressor. I'm just using a little bit of this guy. Even though it looks like it's compressing the snot out of it, it's not really doing a lot. It just makes it louder without sounding like it's compressed. I'm also using another parallel compressor over here, just like we did on the drums, only using a CLA 76. But I've got it turned way down, so it's compressing. It looks like it's compressing a lot, but you can barely hear it. The whole idea is to make it sound as natural as possible. Don't look at the meters. Don't look at the meters. Listen with your ears. So this is a song by Jekalyn, and it's called History, and hopefully you go out and buy it when it comes out.
Y'all, want to thank you for making it to the end of this video. I hope you found it relevant and helpful to your workflow and you got something out of it. If you did, please drop a like down below. If you didn't, I appreciate you for watching anyway. All right, but I'll talk to you guys on the next one. I'm out. Holla at you, boy.